Hey there, YouTube. Welcome to another Terraform tidbit. Today we're going to look at setting up some aliases to make Terraform a little bit easier to use in the command line. We'll be doing this with PowerShell today. By the end of this demo, we should so here's what we'll get to is, so normally in Terraform you'd have to do a Terraform init, Terraform plan, Terraform validate. So you have to type out 15, 20 characters per command here each time. So by the end of this, we're just going to set up some aliases so that you can go TFI to do an init, TFP to do a plan, and TFV to do a validate. So that's really the goal is to set up some basic aliases to make it a little bit easier to use the Terraform CLI on a daily basis. So to do that, here's an outline of what we're going to do. We're going to set up just a basic alias. We'll also set up a function in PowerShell. There's a little bit of a nuance around why this is needed. We'll go into that a little bit. But we'll do this just to show how these aliases work in PowerShell. We'll find and update our PowerShell profile with these aliases, and then we'll add them to the profile so that every time you open up a new CLI session, it remembers your aliases. So with that, let's get started. So let's set up a basic alias here. So all right, let's say that this is your original command in PowerShell. You want to write some text to the screen. So you can say write output hello world, for example. All right, and then print some text to the screen. Pretty basic. Now, if instead of typing all this out, you wanted to kind of have a shorthand for it, you could set an alias so that you could do this. So you could say print this text, for example, and apparently this is already an alias for something else. So let's skip past that. Try to ignore that for now if you can. But basically, we're going to try to make this be a shorthand for this. So to do this, you can use set alias in PowerShell. So you can say set alias, and here's the name of the alias that I want to create, so I can call it print, and the value of this is write output. So in other words, whenever I type print in my CLI, it's going to instead substitute write output for it. So now if I do print, it's going to ask me for the text that I want to print. So if I say something, it's going to print that text out. Likewise, this will work for if I say print hello world. Oops. This is going to be equivalent to writing write output hello world. So that's kind of a basic alias and showing how that works. Now there's also you can create functions in PowerShell, and with these you can create arguments to these. There's some nuances that I don't think that are really worth getting into that kind of explains why this works here, but maybe I'll come back to that at a later point in time. But for now, just to show how a function works, it's basically the same thing. So you say, here's my function. The name of my function is write. And in this function, I have a parameter. So we're going to pass some text into this function. And then what I'm going to do in the function is I'm going to write some output, and I'm going to write some text in that output. There's my function. Now I can say write hello world, and it'll do that. So it's gonna pass this hello world text into the function as this text parameter, and then it's going to do a write output on that text and print it out there. All right. So very simple. So that's how to kind of set up an alias and set up a function in PowerShell. Now, that's all well and good, but the problem is, what if I do this? If I start up a new PowerShell session and I say write my text. Maybe that one's an existing one. Here we go. So ignore the right one because we're kind of reusing some built-in aliases here for write and print, so that's an implementation detail. But if we say print my text here, we get back to that initial issue that we saw over here. I already cleared my screen, but So the reason to point this out is that PowerShell did not, when I started a new PowerShell session over here, it did not remember the alias that we set up over here. And so how do you get PowerShell to remember your alias? The way you do that is, or one way to do that is to update your PowerShell profile. So if you're not familiar already, a PowerShell profile, it's a PowerShell file. And inside that file, you can put commands to run whenever your PowerShell session starts. So basically, instead of defining this alias interactively in the CLI, you can add it into your PowerShell profile, and then every time you run a PowerShell session in the future, it'll set the alias for you. So let's show that. So in PowerShell, you can use this. You could say $profile, and this gives you the path to your PowerShell profile here. So you can see it's a .ps1 file for PowerShell. So, all right, in PowerShell, you could say get content on a file, and that'll give you the contents of the file itself. Now, I don't have a PowerShell profile on this machine currently, so it tells me it doesn't exist. That's fine though. So let's open this up in VS Code here. All right, so here's our PowerShell profile in VS Code. Nothing in it so far, but so just to show how this works, you can put some basic code in here and have it run when you start a new session. So for example, if I say this, here's my profile. I can start up a new PowerShell session, and you can see it prints the text out. So, I can start as many PowerShell sessions as I want, and it's always going to run the commands inside this profile here. So now what? So now we need to do what we came here to do, which is to add the actual Terraform aliases. So here's a first one, just TF. So the idea here is to create just a shortcut for calling the Terraform CLI. So you could just do this here. So let's show this. So if we do set alias TF, and this is going to replace Terraform. So for example, if I do this, I can say TF, and that gives me all the Terraform help text. I could say TF-version instead of doing Terraform-version. All right, so helpful there. We could do TFI to do a Terraform init, and here's where the functions come into it. So if I do function TFI, TF init. Well, before I get into that, let's just show that it works here. So if I say TFI Terraform init ran, and that's the equivalent to me coming here and doing a Terraform init, right? So a nice little shortcut there. So why did I set this up as a function here? It's because when you use set alias here, you can only use a single command as part of this value here. So if I try to do this, set alias TFI to Terraform space init, just to show you what happens. PowerShell errors out, and it basically says it can't find a parameter that matches init. So this second argument right here, aliases don't allow you to have multiple arguments. You can just have a single argument here. So the way to get around that is to create a function instead. And a function, you can have as many of these commands as you want. So it's more of a technical detail, not super important, but if you're trying to set these aliases up, you kind of have to be aware of it. All right, so there's a Terraform init. One other thing to call out here is that, just to be aware of, is that, so we set an alias for TF here, and inside of this function, we can reuse that alias that we set up earlier, right? So we could have said Terraform init in here, and that would have worked, but you can also reuse the alias that you defined earlier in your PowerShell profile. So just good to be aware of that. All right, and then we'll set up some aliases for the other commands here. So TFP for Terraform plan. New Terraform plan. We'll do a Terraform validate alias. And I'll just demonstrate that that works. So we can say TF for Terraform, TFI for Terraform init, TFP for Terraform plan. There's no configuration here, so yeah, it's going to error out. TFE for Terraform validate. Thinks the configuration is valid, even though there's no configuration there. Yeah, whatever there. So that gives you those basic commands. And one other useful one to consider is, this is one that I've set up before, is you can say, for example, like TF and then a version number at the end. So as an example, if you, in your organization or your project, if you have some bit of Terraform configuration that depends on a different version of Terraform than your installed version, it could be helpful to have an alias here. So what I mean by that is, so let's say if I go, so my installed Terraform version that I have set up on my path and stuff, I'm using version 1.3.7. Let's say that I have a repo that has a configuration that's using version 1.1. Now, if I go into that configuration and I try to do a init and a plan and stuff, it's going to try to update to 1.3. And maybe you don't want to do that because you're not ready to do that migration where you're at, something like that. So how can you get around this? One way is to write an alias to just make it easy to call Terraform 1.1 whenever you need to. So for example, here you can say, so here I have a different version of Terraform installed in my machine. So I have Terraform and Vault installed here, and this is version 1.3 I have installed, but then I also have 1.1 inside of this folder. So we have that folder, and we can verify that by calling that exe, checking the version. So this is version 1.1, and the version installed on my machine is 1.3.7. So there's a different version of Terraform in this directory. So now we can say, let's set an alias for that. Let's do it in VS Code. So we can say set an alias tf11, and then the value is going to be #core terraform-1.1 / terraform.exe. All right. So now I can say Terraform version 1.3.7, Terraform 1.1 version 1.1. I could say Terraform 1.1 init, Terraform 1.1 plan, etc. And so, yeah, if you need to work with multiple versions, you can use these aliases to switch back and forth between different versions pretty easily. Of course, you have to remember to type this in your command line, but yeah, it's a start at least. So that's pretty much it. So just to recap, we set up some basic aliases and functions in PowerShell. We added them to our PowerShell profile so that anytime you start a new PowerShell session, you have the aliases available to you. And we set up aliases to call Terraform itself, the Terraform CLI, an alias for Terraform init, an alias for Terraform plan, alias for Terraform validate, and an alias to target a specific version of Terraform. And so that's all. This is just kind of a start, and yeah, you can take this kind of as far as you want with it. There's all kinds of nice things you can set up in here with PowerShell, or you could do the same kind of thing in Bash if you want to, or another shell. Anywho, that's all for now. Have a nice day.